Audio on demand from Vision Christian Media.
Coming up today on The Story.
Home was my safe place, and my parents around that time separated, and I went off to live with my dad, and I got saved at that time as well. And I remember coming back home after living with my dad for a year and a half, and my mum was very different, and we'd come from a very conservative and legalistic kind of church background, and she was living the life up.
The Story.
G'day, I'm Jimmy Colfax. Welcome to The Story. Well, usually we hear stories about children becoming rebellious in their teenage years, and then their parents pray for them for years to turn their lives around. Well, today, and for the next couple of programs, we're going to pretty much hear the reverse. Chris Brown was 15 years old when his mother kind of went off the rails and into a party lifestyle. Meanwhile, he felt called to serve in ministry and prayed for years for his mother. Thankfully, the Lord worked in both of their lives, and they are now both serving the Lord in extraordinary ways. We'll hear both of their stories, starting today with Chris, and then his mother, Robin, will share her story. Chris Brown's having a chat with Eric Scatterbo.
Chris Brown, welcome to the program.
Yeah, great. Thanks, Eric. It's great to be with you.
Glad to have you with us. And where are you joining us from today?
From Perth, Western Australia.
Okay, well, the first question that comes to my mind when hearing about your story is, what was it like being 15 years old? Well, I mean, that's a confusing time of life in general. And then all of a sudden, your mother kind of going off the rails.
Yeah, it was very different for me because I was, home was my safe place, and my parents around that time separated, and I went off to live with my dad, and I got saved at that time as well. And I remember coming back home after living with my dad for a year and a half, and my mum was very different, and we'd come from a very, conservative and legalistic kind of church background, and she was living the life up. And I remember one night, a funny story, I'd actually that night been baptized in the Holy Spirit, and I came home and I was just so fired up and so excited about my faith and what had just happened to me, this amazing experience. And my mum's lying in bed and she's sick, and I don't know what kind of day she'd had or why she was sick, but she was really ill. And I said, "Mum, I'll pray for you." And she said, "Okay, that will be good." And so then I burst out praying in tongues, and I was like going for it, really praying for her. And almost immediately she said, "That's okay, Chris. I'm feeling better now. You can stop praying."
Kind of like just get away from me, please.
Yeah. I don't need that kind of prayer. So it was, it was an interesting experience, and I tried to share about the Lord with her and encourage her to come to church. But she wasn't interested. And in fact, she had gone down a choice of not believing in God anymore. She decided to be an atheist, and she was going to live her life as she wanted to live it.
Yeah. Well, of course, we're going to hear more about her side of the story, but today we're going to kind of hear your perspective. And boy, that is so strange that you're going one way, you're on fire for the Lord, and she's going the exact opposite way. And you mentioned that your background was in a bit of a legalistic church. Well, at this point, let's go back and find out what led up to this experience. What kind of home life did you have before that, and where were you born and raised?
Yeah, I was born in Sydney in New South Wales, and spent about 7 years there. Then we moved to Tassie for about 5 years, and we moved around a lot. I went to 5 or 6 different primary schools while my parents were trying to get their marriage restarted. And it was terrible as a kid because I was always the new kid in school. And I remember even down in Tasmania, coming from the mainland was even worse, like you were an alien if you were coming from the mainland. And
oh, wow.
I found it very difficult in school, always bullied. My brother and I both bullied a lot. And, home was the only really safe place where we didn't get picked on or beat up or teased. And so, it was for me a very difficult time when I was around 14, 15 years of age, and my parents sat us down and in the lounge room. I can still picture it in my mind. And they said that we no longer love each other, and we're going to separate our relationship. And, that was a very distressing time for me. And I was very depressed, thought about ending it all. And I really didn't do well at that time. And praise God, that time when Leighton Ford came to Perth, Billy Graham's brother-in-law, and held a crusade in the city. And I remember being invited by a youth group, by one of my friends at school to go along. And the first night I went, and I was so touched by the message that I wanted to go forward. So I said to my friend who was sitting next to me, would you, give me some moral support? Would you come down the front with me? And he said, I'm not going down to the front. So I was too scared to go on my own. So I went home that night, and I didn't make a commitment, and I was so distressed all night. I couldn't sleep, and I actually made my own way there the next day, and I was the first one down the front that evening. I really wanted to make that commitment, and my life turned around from that point on. I had this great joy and delight in having met Jesus, because before I'd known about him, and I'd had this great moral, legalistic background. I knew what it was to live a good life, but I had no understanding of faith and what it meant to have a Savior die for me. I just didn't understand that. And having that revelation, it was wonderful.
Let's back up a little bit. So growing up, you were raised in a Christian church, a Christian family, but it was more good ethics without really knowing why you were doing it. Would that kind of sum up your experience?
Yeah, it was like you do this because you have to do it. And there wasn't an understanding of the grace of God and how my sins had really been, paid for by the blood of Jesus. I felt like I had to perform to be acceptable to God.
So that meant you had good ethics, but not necessarily an understanding of why you were living a moral life.
Yeah, I remember really standing up for moral things at school, and, even getting teased for it and bullied because, I was this Christian guy standing up for God, but I had no understanding about my faith. I just understood that it was a good thing, but I didn't know why it was a good thing.
But then, as you explained, you put your faith in Jesus, and now you had a vibrant living relationship with the Lord, and out of that flowed your ethics and morality.
Yeah, so it kept me safe, I guess, in that time when my parents were struggling and we weren't going to church. There was a period of about 3-4 years where we didn't go to church at all when we moved to Western Australia. And during that time, I think that strong moral and ethical background kept me safe from alcohol and cigarettes and the things that were going on at school. And I managed to keep clear of most of that until Jesus saved me. And then after that, I had the best of both worlds. I had a strong ethical background and also the love of Christ in my heart. So.
And then your faith even grew to the point of wanting to get involved in ministry. How did that come about?
Yeah, well, pretty much after I got saved at 15, my pastor took me aside and with about 5 or 6 other young people, and he discipled us for a year, which was great. We would meet once a week, and he saw something in me and asked me to take over, the youth ministry. So as quite a young person, I started in youth ministry, leading the young people, and that was a very exciting time for me. I remember going into university as a 17-year-old and, just being so excited about living for Jesus. So half the time when I was supposed to be studying, I was out on the streets, hanging out with people, working with chaplains in schools. And, I didn't do so well at my studies because I was so involved in just winning people for Jesus.
Wow, you're on fire.
Yeah, it was an exciting time in my life.
Yeah, I'm just, it keeps coming back to my mind, the contrast. You're just getting more and more on fire. And meanwhile, your very conservative mother, or formerly very conservative mother, is going the exact opposite way. Yeah,
and it was at times, sometimes with my brother and with her, there was conflict because, I was wanting to share with them about Jesus and talk to them about my faith and, discuss their behavior, in a way as lovingly as I could. But I do seem to recall being probably a bit arrogant and probably a bit too forthright in the way I spoke to them, and so probably created some pain in them and some desire to not really spend time with me in my convictions at in that period. But nonetheless, you began to grow and felt a calling into ministry? Yeah, I was at university and involved in the Christian group at the university. And many people there kept telling me, Chris, you should be in missions. And I had this plan, you know, I wasn't going to do that. I was going to be a teacher and be a Christian role model to these young kids in schools where there weren't many male Christian role models. And so I had it all worked out. And I remember one day I was listening to a Christian singer sing and at a concert at a church, and God just told me, Chris, I want you to go outside. And so, you know, I eventually was obedient, went outside and lay down under the stars, and I just felt overwhelmingly emotional, and I just felt God's presence so strong. And out of my mouth came this statement, God, wherever you want me to go, whatever you want me to do, I'm yours and I'll do it. And I remember after that time, I was in my room just having a devotional time with the Lord, and he said, Chris, I want you to be a missionary. And I was like, God, don't do this to me. I'm going to have to go and tell everyone now, eat humble pie. And but yeah, I couldn't ignore what he was saying to me. And so I made that commitment, that pledge, you know, just in the previous month. So I went back to uni and I told everyone that, you know, God's spoken to me, that, you know, this is the plan. And I'm actually, I gave up my university degree and left uni and began to prepare to be a missionary. I worked and earned money so that I had some savings to pay for what was going to come.
You're listening to The Story. Today, Eric Scatterbo is chatting with Chris Brown in Perth, who's sharing his story and how God was working in his life. Meanwhile, as he shared his mother going in the opposite direction and further away from the Lord. Next, we'll hear how Chris meets his future wife and the miraculous way they returned to Australia from the Philippines. All that and more is coming up when we return.
The Story. If this program has highlighted something you'd like prayer for, we'd love to pray for you. Call 1-800-PRAY-FOR-ME. That's 1-800-772-936. It's a free call. Or text 0401 132 888.
Hi, I'm Jimmy Colfax and this is The Story. We're back with more of Chris Brown sharing his life journey. As we heard before the break, the Lord called Chris to be a missionary. Now, here's more of his chat with Eric Scatterbo.
You eventually went to the Philippines where you met your future wife?
Yeah, so I joined Youth with a Mission, and we had what we call a discipleship training school. And it was during that time that I met my wife on the base in the Philippines. And we had quite a brief engagement. That might be a story for another day. But yeah, after 1 month, we were engaged. And,
oh, wow. 1 month.
Yeah, it was, but it is a bit of a story. So I know we've got a lot to get through today. But yeah, it was, we knew it was right and we made that decision. And so I went off to Thailand for 2 months just after we got engaged, did my outreach there. And then I came back and spent 4 months with her family, getting to know her family, asking for a hand in marriage from her father, and doing mission work in the community there. Remember getting very sick with typhoid, and at that point, God actually really spoke to us very clearly that he wanted us to come back to Australia. And I was very ill, very sick, and we had no money. And God said, it's time for you to go home. And so this journey of faith, great faith that God taught me about began at that moment. It was really a big step for us to trust him.
Yeah, I understand there's a story involving the airport that the two of you went through.
Yeah, so I was so ill and we had no money, and what we had was $50 left, and that was to pay for the sewing of her wedding dress. And it was either have a husband and no wedding dress, or have no husband and have the wedding dress. So we figured we'll use this last $50 and we'll buy some antibiotics and go to the hospital. And yeah, so anyway, we had a lot of people praying back home. And after 2 weeks, I came good, but we had no money to pay for the wedding dress, no money to get on a bus, no money to get back to Manila, and we didn't have the money for an airline ticket. So, we had literally about 20 cents in our pocket.
Wow.
And we packed our bags. We walked around the town saying goodbye to everyone, saying we're leaving this afternoon, and we didn't even have money for the bus fare. And we were literally there with our bags packed. But as we went around, the people that we'd ministered to, we didn't ask them. They were just poor farmers. Keeping in mind this is the Philippines, it was not a rich country. Mm-hmm. They just began to give us money to bless us as we left. And when we got to the end of that day, we had enough money for the bus and for a boat fare to get to Manila.
Wow.
And so we got to Manila with that. And then, of course, when we got to Manila, I still didn't have a visa for my wife. I still didn't have an airline ticket for her. And my own visa was running out in about 10 days' time. So this was really, God, you either show up or we're not getting married and I'm going to have to leave the country.
Oh, wow, yeah.
And so we walked into the bank and, to see if there was any money in the account. Mm-hmm. And the bank said, oh, by the way, Mr. Brown, about 6 months ago, we took $500 from your account, which we shouldn't have. Here it is.
Oh, wow.
So they literally handed me over the $500, which was enough for her airline ticket. Then we went to the embassy, keeping in mind we're walking everywhere in the hot sun because we don't even have the money for any public transport. Mm-hmm. And we get into the embassy. I say to the person there, look, we've been waiting 4 months for her visa. What's happening? And they said, well, we haven't received a letter from the Philippine government to say she's not married and you're applying for a fiance visa and we need evidence that she's not married. And I said, look, surely there must be someone we can talk to about this because my visa's running out in just a few days' time. So she said, well, look, let me go and get someone for you. So we were there praying in the middle of the embassy, and we didn't mind that we were praying loud. We needed God and we needed him right there. And so everyone was looking at us in this embassy and we're praying. And 5 minutes later, she comes back with the higher-up person, and they said if she'll sign a statutory declaration that she's not married, we'll give you the visa.
Oh, okay.
So we signed the stat dec, and 1 minute later, they came out with the passport with the visa in it.
Wow.
I couldn't believe it. Right there and then, there was the visa.
Wow.
And then we had to go and buy the ticket. So I think we had till 3:00 this afternoon to get the ticket, and it was $2.50 when we arrived. We bought the ticket, and then we had a few days left till we were going to get on the plane. We had no money left. Literally no money left. I think we had $12 left, and the departure tax at the airport was $25 for the two of us. And I remember being given a lift to the airport with a rich Chinese friend of mine. And I thought, God, surely she's going to bless us. She's going to give us some money. And I remember quite clearly God speaking to me and saying, don't you dare say anything. And I said, okay, I'll be quiet. And she didn't give anything. I said, God, I didn't say anything, and she didn't give anything. What's going on? And he said, are you willing to trust me? Okay, God. So we get into the airport, and you know what you do first at the airport? You put your heavy luggage on the plane. So we check our luggage on the plane, knowing that we didn't have the money to actually get through the departure tax section of the airport.
Oh, wow.
And so the luggage is going even if we aren't.
Yeah.
And so we lined up. There was about 8 queues there, and there were thousands of people trying to get through those queues. We couldn't even see the ticket booth, you know, where you pay for this tax. Mm-hmm. And we just picked a line, you know, it was a bit of a pick the shortest line. Mm-hmm. And we got to the end of the queue, and the person working at the desk is a friend of my wife's, my fiance from university.
Yeah.
She hasn't seen him for years. And, you know, they have this discussion and they're all excited. And then he says, you have to pay for your departure tax.
Yeah.
And she said, Kuya, which means older brother in Filipino. We only have this. And she showed him what we had. And he opened his wallet and paid the rest, which was probably about a week's salary for him.
Oh, my
goodness. So right there at the very last moment, when they're calling out our names over the intercom that we need to get to our plane, he's paying for our departure tax.
Wow.
And so we ran for the plane. We got on board. We landed in Brunei. I mean, I'd had no opportunity to I tried to call my friends in Brunei. We were supposed to stay with them 6 days. We literally didn't even have money to make a phone call. And so I asked around, look, can you give me money to make a phone call? Someone gave us a $10 phone card. It was 11 o'clock at night. We rang the house, no answer. They kicked us out of the airport. We're sitting in the just under a kind of patio outside the airport all night, all night with our luggage. We couldn't sleep. And the next morning I start calling around. I called the office and they said, they're in Kuala Lumpur for the Chinese New Year. They won't be back for days.
Oh, no.
I think, what do we do?
Yeah.
What are we going to do? So I just kept calling the house. We had a phone card. That's what we had. So we kept calling. And 11 o'clock that morning, so we've been at the airport 12 hours, someone picks up the phone. And it was her father. He'd come back from Kuala Lumpur because he'd been unwell. He picks up the phone, takes us to his house, and he rings them. They come back straight away from KL. We spend 6 days with them, have a beautiful time. We arrive in Perth. 4 months later, we get married. Keep in mind, we had no money at all. God paid for the entire thing.
Wow.
I think $2,000 just appeared in our bank account, just appeared there, and paid for her parents' airfares to come to Perth for the wedding. So, this journey of faith, and I learned some very big lessons in faith right there at that time, which I would never forget for the rest of my life.
Wow, I don't think I'll ever forget this story for the rest of my life. That's quite a story.
Yeah. Well, we had the opportunity to see God come through in many ways and many times over the years.
And then moving on to the next major event in your life, you moved back to Perth?
Yeah. So we moved back, we got married, and we were, still feeling this call to missions. But in the meantime, I had a wife and, I had to make ends meet. So I went and got a job with my old employer. Mm-hmm. And I began a career there, which lasted almost 20 years. But this section of that career was 14 years where I started off as a storeman and worked my way up to state manager within a big German company. Mm-hmm. And, it was a very successful career. And during that period, we kept pursuing mission. We kept trying to find a way to get over into mission, and it never, ever seemed to work out. And at that time, we also started a photography business, and that became quite successful. We were nominated 3 times to Australia's top wedding photographer and Capture magazine, and that was going really well. So I rang up the boss and I said, look, I think I need to go part-time because, the photography is going so well. And he said, Chris, I don't care what hours you work because you're doing such a good job. You just show up when you want to show up. And as long as you're getting the job done, I'll keep paying you what you're earning.
Wow.
So that was just an amazing offer from him.
Yeah, you don't hear that every day.
No. So for a year, I tried to make that work, and it just got too crazy. So I thought, no, I can't do this. It really is a full-time position. And I do believe that God's calling me into ministry and that call has never left. And so it was about this time that I had an offer or an opportunity to work for a mission agency, and we applied for the position, and it was 3 days a week. And I thought, this will be perfect. It's the milk and honey. I'm going to be supporting missionaries in the field. I'm going to be talking to churches about them going, and my wife just couldn't get a piece about it. And I struggled with this because I thought it was really the answer for our situation. And so they actually rang me to offer me the position, and I said, well, I'm sorry, I'm going to have to say no because my wife doesn't have a piece about it. So we let that go, and just a couple of months later, I got an offer from the church we were attending, a very large Pentecostal church in Perth, if I would like to come on staff. And I saw the wisdom of God in all of that, and I thank God again for my wife who, stuck to her conviction. And if we had taken that other position, I wouldn't have been able to accept the role at the church. And this is where our mission journey really began, because they offered me the description, I guess, for the ministry as the missions pastor there at the church, as well as looking after their international movement. And so my job was to go all around the world, talking to people about Jesus, growing the movement, and basically bringing Jesus wherever I went. And it was fantastic, but it meant that I had to leave.
I just want to stop you there, because let's not overlook the fact that you turned down a job that you wanted based on your wife not having a peace. I mean,
yeah.
That was, well, A, you're honoring her, but B, you're honoring faith that if you don't both have a peace as a couple, that's not a good thing to do. And you were blessed by obeying that.
Yeah, because I realized
that had to be hard.
When I look back at it, it was, it was hard leaving. I was coming up for my 15 years annual long service leave.
Yeah.
The company was going to have their 250th anniversary, and we were all going to go to Germany and have a big party. And so, we were turning all that down by leaving the company, which was fine. We did that. And then, also turning down this opportunity, which for me was really what I wanted to do, was a big challenge for me personally. But, I thank God that over our marriage, I've learned to trust my wife's intuition and to listen to her and to understand that there's a reason why God puts you with someone, and it's not for you to be the Lord and Master, it's for you to work as a team.
That was part one of Eric Scatterbo's conversation with Chris Brown in Perth, sharing how God was working in his life. As we've been hearing, it's quite obvious that Chris was on fire for the Lord and striving to follow God's will for his life. As it says in the Bible, Jesus prefers if we are either hot or cold. Those who are spiritually hot are engaged in their faith, like Chris was. But those who are cold have an opportunity to be influenced in a powerful way by the gospel. From Jesus' perspective, it's actually better to be spiritually cold, since that means you're more likely to notice the calling of God. As we'll hear on future programs, that's exactly what happens to Chris's mother. She was pretty cold towards the things of the Lord in Chris's young adult years, but we'll hear how she becomes on fire for the Lord with amazing results. That's all coming up as this series continues. So until next time, when we'll hear more of Chris Brown's story, I'm Jimmy Colfax, encouraging you to share your story with someone today.
Next time on The Story.
I had the opportunity to travel to Ethiopia, and I remember landing in that hometown, and we walked into this huge meeting. There were 5,000 people there, and we were supposed to be speaking on the platform. And we walked in, and the translator starts telling us they're not happy. And so we thought, what's going on here? We've arrived, and already we're not welcome.
Even though Chris Brown came from a broken home and his mother kind of went off the rails when he was a teenager, he was eventually called into full-time ministry, and his faith has become stronger and stronger. Chris will share some of his incredible stories of doing ministry overseas next time.
The Story. Just another way Vision is connecting faith to life.
Thanks for taking time to listen to this audio on demand from Vision Christian Media. To find out more about us, go to vision.org.au.